So I will go ahead and call our meeting to order, and seeing no visitors, I'm going to go with no visitors business at this point. Oh, I'm sorry. Would you like to have the name said? I'm neglecting our cameraman already. I'm taking you for granted. I would move to approve the minutes from the January 27, 2016 meeting at this time. Do I have a second?
Sure.
I have a second from Mike. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have a unanimous approval of the minutes from January 27th. Moving on to town meetings and Act 46. Last meeting, we had wanted to have a discussion about what we would say or be prepared to say or discuss at town meeting regarding Act 46. And so I'll open the floor to begin that discussion.
So I guess I'll jump in, and I know that there might be a immediate fear associated with it, but I hope that we can, well, I don't know. I also just wonder whether there's an opportunity that there might be people at town meeting who want to engage and talk about what's going on, and it might be an opportunity for us to say, very simply, what this committee's been up to, but asking for participation.
I think we have to give an overview of the law and then talk about the what happened this week and the capsule repealed for next year or the year after, those sorts of things. So we'll have to, I think, do a little bit of basic education for people who just know that they've heard the word Act 46 and it has something to do with money.
Okay. Jen, did I see your hand?
Yes, it was on my way up. So in Moncton, we have a separate meeting for our school budget, which is distinct from the town meeting. And so I guess you guys had raised this, and I was picturing more sort of as questions came up at the town meeting, because I don't know that Act 46 is like an agenda item, or it's not a specific item for the town meeting. As far as the caps, I expect we would address them in our budget meeting, our school meeting, right? So I guess I'm trying to ask, like, what are we trying to accomplish in this part of the conversation?
So my thought was that this was more a discussion for us just to all make sure we were comfortable with things that might come up, so that nobody felt like they were put on the spot without us all discussing it. Does anybody feel uncomfortable with the idea of answering basic questions about Act 46 at this point, or what our committee is doing? Michaela?
I'm not raising my hand because I'm saying yes, I am.
Oh. Okay.
I'm wondering about whether or not whatever we decide or decide not to do is proactive or reactive, and I think it's important that that's consistent within town meetings. And it would seem like if questions come up, we would want to answer them, although I wonder about us wanting to be careful about stating generally the law that we might not all feel an equal comfort in talking about, versus what the charge of our committee is and perhaps what our objectives are that we've laid out. And then asking questions about that. That feels to me like it might be a more appropriate response from this committee than sort of generally speaking about the law.
I guess during town meeting, from my limited experience, because I've only been the chair at one of those events, it seemed like what Jen was saying, that during town meeting it's more of an opportunity for the people who attend town meeting to ask us questions on any variety of topics that associates to our school. And then maybe more the budget meeting that we have specifically prior to that is more an area where people who are interested in understanding more of the nuances would be there anyway to ask questions. Because I feel like nobody's just going to be like, well, can you explain basically what Act 46 is and the legal implications for our budgets in the next 2 years? From my experience at a town meeting, that is not the question that's going to come up. The question might come up with is, are we going to bust the cap, for Act 46, or what are we doing to stop Act 46 because I don't want to give up my local control. Those are the types of questions I can imagine fielding at town meeting, and I think those answers are very different than preparing a generalized statement for what Act 46 is.
So I would just offer that town meetings or board meetings could potentially look very different in towns who really struggled to pass a budget last year. So for some that had sort of your run-of-the-mill, this is our budget, kind of meeting last year, could perhaps look very different from those of us who had meetings last year, and those meetings had a different flavor. So I guess, and since I'm from one of those towns, that's my perspective. So I guess I was thinking that the more clarity we have and consistency we have, the more trust we're building in our constituents, that which towns could benefit from.
Do you have a budget meeting in Bristol prior to your town meeting?
We have it after our school budget.
Really? You had
No,
an
well,
after
no.
town meeting?
No.
They flip
A board meeting, a regular board meeting, you mean?
I think
Yeah.
Or do you mean our special
I don't think
meeting?
The special meeting.
we do not have a special meeting. We have sometimes called this February meeting before the March meeting, the meeting where you're going to get information about the budget. But like our town meeting, I mean, you have no idea what's going to happen. We had the one year where the only question was, tell us something good that's happening at the school.
Sure.
Was the one question that was asked. But my experience from all of them has been that whenever we go and we have something prepared and we say it, it goes so much better than if we
So
just keep questions.
would everybody like it if we email out just our charter of our Act 46 that has the objectives listed in it to everyone, so everyone has it? And then if you want, I mean, I'm going to be drafting a little something to say kind of at the beginning of ours, when we introduce our board members to town or whatever, and kind of a little overview. And I think mine in my town report included a little bit about Act 46 as well and how it impacted us.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, we could draft a little, something like a little paragraph that kind of overviews it, that people can look and adjust to their own thing, but it would give a starting point, or do we want to try to craft it in our open meeting here? Because I know that becomes a little more challenging. But I think that everyone's familiar enough that I don't feel like we have to have the exact same thing we say, because each town has its own flavor. I think that being very sincere, comes across when you can be flexible in what you say. But I'm happy to do something like that if that would help everyone. Allison?
I'd just like to say I would prefer not to engage people in conversation now because we don't know what we're doing. So to start the conversation on our part and engage the community, I don't think is a wise idea because we don't know what we're doing. And we don't want to take that conversation down a road that we can't come back from, would be my fear.
Okay.
If somebody asks, it's okay.
Sure.
We can give them information, but don't definitely start the conversation.
Okay.
And I think there are two things. There's just clarified here in my mind that there's a difference between what our Bristol board is doing about Act 46 and then what this committee is doing. And I guess I want to know, my feeling is that we are still very open-minded about our possibilities and what might happen. And so we're very much at the beginning phases of this, and we are looking forward to working with the community on deciding how we're going ahead. And I guess I wanted to check with people and make sure that that's other people's take on it as well before I say something like that.
I think that's fair. I think we're in a fact-finding stage. That seems to be what we're looking at right now. So we haven't made a particular decision on the path we're going down. We're just doing a lot of fact-finding. Nancy?
I think the other, at the Starksboro town meeting, I think the board may get a question about the cap, but will be proactive about providing that information about where our budget landed in relation to the cap, wherever the cap landed. I'm still.
We got the point.
Okay. But,
and it is repealed for 2000.
no, I understand that, but in terms of dollars, how far under?
Nobody knows that exactly.
Right. But the question that I think I would anticipate we'll get as a board that we might get is why didn't the study committee decide to go for tax incentives that were available if you went for an accelerated merger? And I think we all have a very clear way to respond to that if we get that question. We have a hired consultant who advised us that we really didn't have the time to be prepared to go for an accelerated merger, and we also when the executive director of the VSBA gave a presentation for all 5 towns in Starksboro. After that meeting, she said to me, and I can't remember where I must have been afterwards when we were talking about how it all went.
She said it publicly.
Did she say it publicly?
Absolutely.
Okay, that she thought we weren't ready to go for an accelerated merger. So we took that advice into consideration, and that's why we're taking this time to explore what the possibilities are before we decide what path to go down.
Stephen?
Just very quickly, I mean, at the Moncton town meeting, which is where we pass municipal budget, that often what we have is our representatives come and talk to the town as a whole, and that's where we really discuss what's going on at the legislature. That's where I would expect to get into Act 46 if there were questions. In terms of the charge of this committee, I think it probably doesn't come up at town meeting. It probably does come up at your informational meeting the Thursday before.
Okay. Nancy?
I guess I would also say that made me think of David Sharp usually comes to our town meeting, and I'm sure he'll have something to say about Act 46. I don't know what he'll say, but I'm sure he'll say it.
You can predict it. Well, I just think that actually there are 2 parts to Act 46. There's the immediate that we've been dealing with for the last, and then there's the bigger part of Act 46, which is something has to happen by 2019. And I think I hope Dave is going to talk about how this, the immediate as well as a little bit about the long term, because the immediate's had the biggest impact on all of us this year.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I feel comfortable with everything we talked about so far, and I think that to me, should questions come up, I expect we'll talk a little bit about Act 46 during our school budget portion, and about that we have this committee. But to me, part of it is we're in this fact-finding stage and kind of all that we said already, and we're looking for input, right? So while we aren't ready to just debate, should we consolidate this way or that way, if people have questions, concerns, things that they'd like to share with us, to me, I think we can be collecting that input at any moment that people want to share it. I mean, maybe not in the meeting, like now we can get that input as well as when we're ready to have public forums about it later.
Okay. So I would recommend at this time, I think this is a healthy discussion, and if we think of something more, we can obviously come back to it in the meeting tonight. Did you have the current 5-town info for financial income?
No, not yet. I don't have that information yet. Howard's still finalizing tax rates.
Oh, okay, so we can't do number 6 on the agenda.
Maybe I misunderstood. Is this the budget that we just passed this year?
It was the sheet for each town of the budgets that we proposed.
I did not get that, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Allison, will you make a note that number 6 will be moved to our next meeting? Because we don't have the information right now. Okay, thank you. So that will allow us to move to number 5 for the pros and cons list brainstorming for the unified district. I have two options for us, and I'll just let the board choose which way we'd like to go on this. We don't have many of us here tonight, but I think we have enough to split into two groups if that's easier to facilitate this type of brainstorming structure, or we can do it all as one. Any preferences? We obviously will come back as one group
I'd
after
split.
we do
I'd split.
Okay.
Split.
So can we just 1-2 it, or does anybody care how we split? Okay, so we'll just 1-2 it. Michaela, 1, 2, 1 Dawn, 2 Mike, 1, 2 Nancy, 1 Stephen, 2 Jen, 1 Armando, 2 Rebecca, 1 Allison. Okay, so why don't 1s go over there, 2s over here, if that's fair? And why don't we go ahead and give ourselves at least a half an hour to just work on this, and if we get done early, we can obviously come back. Just make sure
We
somebody's...
don't have any big chart paper or anything,
We
right?
don't.
So I'll just take notes.
Yeah, if you need a legal sheet paper of that.
Do you
but-
care if it's digital and I just send it to you?
No,
Helps me.
whatever helps with the creative process.
I know.
Okay, so we're gonna just bring the meeting back to one large group. I have to say, I always really like our smaller group discussions. I find them very interesting, and I hope everybody else did as well. I think that although we should have a discussion right now, that it would be easiest if our two computer note takers email it, and we kind of consolidate the list and send them out to everybody, and then we can have a really good discussion with those lists in hand in advance of the next meeting, which is in 2 weeks. Because for me, I have to kind of see things on paper.
Okay.
So do you want me to send this to you
Or
to who?
sure. You
I'm
can
gonna share it with you, is that okay?
Sure.
You can have her send it to me if you want.
Yeah, can you send it to Jen too? You can send it.
No,
to
I can send it to both of you.
That would be
Do you have
great.
multiple email accounts?
I don't.
No, I'm just kidding.
Don't send it to me 8 times, just once is fine. But we'll work to consolidate it and send it out in advance of the next meeting, so everybody just can look at it and just kind of, I don't know, we had a lot of notes at our table, so lots of things to think about. But I thought it might be fun to just open the floor a little bit and have maybe one person from each group just very briefly discuss maybe some highlights or kind of a general sense of how that discussion went, because I think ours went slightly differently than we had imagined and had some challenges we hadn't expected, and it was interesting. So, group 1, since you're number 1, would you like to go first?
Is that me?
Hey, could you anybody
I'm trying to, okay. Just a few highlights. We spend time talking about that like local control thing and how we can sort of get over that barrier and what the different opportunities are to get multiple people in multiple towns to have input into a budget. Wait, can I just clarify something? Did you guys talk solely about the pros and cons of a unified union?
Yes, we did.
Okay, good.
Well, we attempted to. We got off track occasionally, but yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I did.
We didn't. We were like right on it.
I'm plenty.
So anyway, we had discussions about that and you know talked about satellite meetings and that sort of thing. We talked about the pros of not being in the accelerated path and being able to learn from other SUs and sort of what they're doing. The opportunities of students not being, or families, kids not being locked into one school in a specific town because that's where they live, and the possibility to go to school in other towns, so school choice within the district, what we now call the SU, and sort of the idea of a magnet school, if you will, where the different schools can have focuses on different things, like, you know, STEM, a school that, you know, it was focuses on STEM, and a school was focuses on outdoor experiences or adventure ed kind of things, or more traditional schools, public schools as we see them now. And we talked certainly about the challenges, the current governance structure where there's multiple board meetings and how that's taxing on central office, superintendents, those kinds of things. and a unified union would perhaps give us an opportunity to go deeper into budgets instead of like sort of these surface budget conversations, because we're having so many of them right now. And maybe being able to spend more time on one and having more people at the table. Certainly the cons being that fear of like breaking down what our traditional sense of our community is, and how we value that in different towns. How those meetings would look differently is a fear, and that the budget altogether is more complex, and they're already hard to understand, and will potentially be a little bit more challenging to understand. Certainly more stakeholders sometimes makes more work sort of convincing people or helping people understand the whole thing. We talked about debt, the sharing of debt as a con, and how do you restructure that, and the fear for some communities that consolidation means the closing of schools, and how do we assure people that that's not a reality or a goal of this, and the fear of a community sort of losing its school or losing its hub. The fear from Lincoln and Starksboro residents who can currently vote on their school budget on the floor, but will not be able to under the law Act 46. That was a lot, and there's a lot on here I didn't cover. Does that feel good?
Nope, you did a good job giving an overview. Okay. Group 2, did somebody want to provide an overview? And if they don't, I'm happy to do it instead, but I want to give everybody else an opportunity.
Again, maybe you took the notes, but I guess one of the things that struck me about our organization was that for every pro we found, there was a similar offsetting con. I guess the example I would give is it might be possibly easier to get board members, or it might be possibly harder to get board members. Go ahead, Jen.
I think that's what I took away from it too, and it's interesting hearing all the notes that you're sharing, that I feel like what I would pull out of our notes are actually mostly different things. A lot of times when you break into groups, you have similar conversations in the groups, so hopefully we'll have a really great list all together. I think I don't really know how to summarize it. We talked about so much.
Maybe you can talk about our approach, because I think our approach was different than theirs.
Why don't you share
what you're
sharing?
Yeah. Okay. So I think that you guys took a very analytical approach, and I think ours was a little bit more free-flowing. We really tried to throw out pros and cons, and what we started noticing was really there were some pros and cons, because a lot of it depended on how the board of a unified district would actually implement a lot of these thoughts into policy as to how they would play out. And we really found that there are a lot of ways that things could flow depending on that. And we had a lot of discussions about governance and whether less board members and more competition equals a higher quality standard, or if actually having a lot more board members who are already of a good quality standard provide more checks on decision making, so that things don't get so centralized that there's not one to say, wait, this just doesn't feel right. We talked a lot about equality versus equity, and we had a lot of questions regarding federal funding, and how resources really could be shared. And we didn't have answers for all of that. And so that made it hard to say whether that would be a pro or a con, because we don't know without those answers. We also had a discussion about whether or not less board members would make it easier for the legislature to have more power and control over implementing their wishes, versus a lot of us yelling back at them. There would be fewer voices yelling back sometimes. Interesting. We also talked about community, and we made a very interesting point, at least. What it says, I don't know, but about capital investment, how we invest in our buildings, and it's a very community-oriented thing. And kind of if you look at all of our schools at each of our town levels versus Mount Abraham and its condition, definitely not the worst school. As Nancy pointed out, she's been to a lot worse. But it was interesting.
I've been thrown out of a lot of work.
Nancy brings a whole new insight level. But that it was interesting how the town's perception of asking for improvements at Mount Abraham were somewhat different than a lot of the experiences that the individual elementary school towns had when they've had bonds or improvements for their buildings. And so whether our community sense would grow or if we would have less interest in the sense of community on an educational level. So that's where we went. And a lot of times our discussion kind of wandered, as Nancy pointed out, we didn't stick to strict rules of brainstorming sometimes because we just had a lot of discussion. But as Jim pointed out, it was just interesting and fun to see how the conversation went. It was, although it was different from yours, we did hit on a lot of the same stuff, but maybe from a different perspective. So I think the two lists going together as one will just be an eye-opener for us when we all sit down and kind of look at them, and maybe it will highlight for us some more questions that we have that need to be answered for us to decide if some of those things fall into pro categories or con categories.
Or both.
Or both. As we pointed out, we actually have a lot of things that happen naturally here or intentionally that follow a very similar path as a unified district. And one of our points was where on that balancing scale, you know, how far do you go in consolidation or in unifying where you get the most benefits with the least disadvantages? And I think that is a very pertinent point because I think that's what we're actually trying to decide in our whole Act 46 committee here. And it's going to be really challenging because it was a challenging discussion just to have pros and cons on a separate list. So any further discussion or any points any individual person wants to make, because since we have a whole chunk of our meeting that is not going to happen, I'm happy to end a little early tonight if we would like to. Because we will have a meeting not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after during break. I think everybody should get a little positive feedback if we can give it by ending a little early.
I just, one of the things that we did talk about in our committee, and I won't take long on it, was the concept of, since the school board is in a unified district would be sort of up there, that there was really a spot for a parent community council that would meet with the principal, and that might be a way to sort of preserve a lot of the sort of community input. And that you might find people that would be interested in serving on that, since it wouldn't be the same kind of time commitment, it wouldn't be the kind of diving into the budget kind of things that the school boards, they can't believe the amount of work that they do, but yeah.
I think I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think our group had a similar comment of that maybe the central board would handle some of the more detailed and less interesting aspects of the governance.
Arcade.
But so, all that stuff is very important and needs to get done, but that maybe it would actually, like you're saying, open up the local to be more interesting and engaging from, a different group.
A little less restrictive maybe, and what type of group could fill that role. Anybody else have any specifics that they thought was a highlight or something that was strong on their mind that they wanted to talk to the whole group about? Mike?
No, but I have a thought that's buzzing around my brain that I'd like to just say out loud after this conversation.
Well, I don't think this conversation is super happening, so you can go ahead and throw that out.
So I guess I just want to voice a fear about our work. And I know that we've talked some about potential timelines for decision making. This thing is so amorphous and so difficult to, so amorphous that I fear that we will, and I very much like the process that we did today. I like the small groups. I think it's rich conversations. I think there's great investment in this group in making great decisions. I fear that at some point we're going to be pushed to make a decision And I just don't have in my head a process for methodically coming to that decision. And so I don't want there to come a time where someone says, guess what, it's time to do it, and it feels like we haven't done stuff that members of the group feel like have to get done before they can make a decision. And I know that's been voiced at other times, but I was just having it sort of anew the other day, and I just wanted to voice it. And I can do this myself. I need to get the timeline in front of me. I need to back it up so that I have some concept of the time we're spending now and what it means and sort of what we would have to do.
I think I can refer you back to Andrew had given us kind of a potential rundown timeline that he made for us to hit by like presidential election and a different date, so that might give you a good starting point.
Yeah.
And if that's not enough, let me know and I'll see if he has something more concrete that he can give you.
Yeah.
Oh, Allison, sorry, you got to wave. Like focusing over here.
Well, and it's funny because I was just working on that today.
Yeah.
Because we have, one way or another, we have to decide.
Something.
And we have to make a decision and we have to move forward. But there are steps in the process that are very specific. And we have to meet each one of those in order to move in whatever direction we decide to go. So I actually started putting something together.
Although I think the timeline is important, and I think that Andrew has a pretty good sense as well and can give us very more specific dates if we would like at this point. I think part of what I feel like I'm lacking when people are saying a methodical process for making a decision is that voicing the problem is fine, but I'm not hearing a lot of ideas about how to come up with a solution, because I don't think that there is a particular checklist anywhere that each community has used that is the same. And so I think I would just put a request out there that if people have ideas, they don't need to be fully developed. But I don't want people to feel like we've missed a mark or that we've missed this huge checkpoint that they needed checked off in their personal mind. I'd love to at least have the discussion as a group if there's a particular box that you want checked off, so that people feel like their needs are being met before they're required to make a decision. I think we still have not indefinite amounts of time, but several months of time before we're going to have to start coming to a hard decision about what type of plan we need to start focusing on. And so I don't want anybody to feel like trust me, I will need more time to know in advance before we're going to have to come up with making a decision. So I would put out the idea that ideas for solutions would be helpful to that particular question. Nancy, I saw your hand up.
Well, I'm wondering if it would be helpful, and I don't think this would be easy to draft, but I wonder if it would be helpful, in light of what Michael said, to try to draft a game plan as far as how we would spend our time at meetings between now and, say, November, although in my mind November isn't a hard and fast deadline. So that in other words, to try to map out a strategy of how we would, what our discussions would be about, what they would focus on, just as a draft, to see if it's possible to make a plan for further exploration and coming to decisions.
Okay, I wrote that down. That's a helpful suggestion.
But I also want to say one other thing. I'm very interested in sharing information with all of the other similar groups in this state. And I wonder if it's possible for you to get contact information for the chairs through Andrew, I guess, the contact information of the chairs of each of the Act 46 study committees in the state.
Cool.
Okay, and what would we do with those specifically? How would you envision this?
Well, I just, right now, it seems to me that the Vermont School Board Association is kind of the clearinghouse of information. And the Vermont School Board Association has taken a pretty strong position on this topic. And I think it would be helpful to all of the study committees to be able to interact with each other and share information. I don't have any particular information right now that I'd request or provide, that we would provide, but I would think that having that contact list would be helpful so that when that day comes, we'd be ready.
I will see if I can get a hold of that information. The ones that are currently active or all the ones that have been, just to clarify.
The ones that are currently active.
Okay, I just wanted to
Either
make
in
sure.
initial exploration or you know, who got the little grant or the bigger grant.
Okay. Michaela.
So clearly we're not ready, and people are at different levels of readiness depending on what their vision of consolidation or what path we choose will be. But perhaps it would be helpful to brainstorm a list at our next meeting of what people think they're going to need before they'll be ready. And that might mean alternatives, or it might mean, you know, financials, or it might mean guest speakers or whatever, but perhaps that might help us build a timeline, if you will, or versions of agendas going forward.
Okay.
This is, maybe we have total access to this, but I'm kind of interested in the end document that these other groups have submitted. And so I don't know if that's,
We have 3 of those.
we have 3 of them? 'Cause
Andy
I
said
think
we could
that
forward
would
them.
be,
Yeah, can we just email them out with the
Yes.
next
Yeah,
I
agenda?
I
think
have
that
copies
would
of
be
them here, but-
interesting to see
Yeah.
how other groups broke it down and then how, and
So
maybe
let's-
that's something we want to start by going, here's an area like with the teacher's contract people deal with, here's something we can
We'll
start with.
email those
Yes.
with the agenda, and then we can have a set portion of our agenda next time to have at least a quick discussion about if anybody got anything from that that we need to keep going forward on, okay?
So is that articles of agreement?
No, this is their, this is what they submitted, I think, to the Agency of Education to have the board approve their proposal to go forward, because the State Board of Education has to approve it before they can go forward.
So all these districts who
Exactly.
just did the accelerated, we can see their
Yes.
actual document about
I have them right here.
Yeah,
Well,
we'll send
but
those
for
out.
those districts, they have they have the document that Armando described, but then they also have articles of agreement that
Okay.
they wrote after the, right, Armando?
I don't
After
have
they
the article,
approved.
I don't think.
They're
That's
on,
what I-
they're
They're on the
online,
internet.
they're
Yeah,
online on
online
the
on the
VSBA.
Agency of Education.
So
Yeah.
everybody can go out on their
Okay.
own to get
Okay.
the articles if you want to look on them. If you have
VSBA
difficulties,
website.
email
School board
people and find out how to get onto it, but we will email out the 3 plans that got sent up to the agencies as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us what, I'm sorry.
Oh, Nancy, do you know what the website is? It's the
No, I was
VSBA?
going to say which districts.
It's Addison Central.
Rutland Northeast.
I'm not sure if it's Rutland Northeast, the one that Andrew sent us.
Oh, these are the ones that have already, oh, that
These are
you,
Mount Mansfield, so it's Chittenden East. One of them is school governance, Addison Central,
Yeah.
Rutland South, and one more.
Oh, that's more than.
There are 4 of them, and Rutland Northeast.
Okay.
Those are the 4 that Andrew, so I could send them to you. Don't print them out, don't make the mistake I made.
They're very many pages long.
I thought it was
Okay.
gonna be 3 or 4 pages apiece.
It's a report.
So the SU budget on paper will be, has gone up.
Can we copy?
Ellen, go ahead.
So, it may, I'm a little worried about us going too far down the path and coming to something that feels like some sort of decision without getting public input. Because I think that given the last year and budgets and that we're in this pre-decisional input is a big deal for our community. And I know that there are varying levels of comfort, and maybe we won't be able to get people to come and give pre-decisional input. But I think that we have to make that effort, and so I'm a little worried, and maybe it's naive of me to think we're going to come to a decision that easily, but that we need to, that needs to happen sooner rather than later.
Okay. Nancy?
one of the ways I've started to think about that, Elin, is that maybe a way we could go would be to start to consider several different paths. One might be a unified district, one might be unifying a couple of districts together. One might be, I mean, I don't know what they all would, one might be there are any number of different models that we might present to the state board that are approvable alternative structures to a unified district. So in other words, we might come up with a couple different models and then present that to the community so we have something to show and try to get their input on that, because then it's more tangible, more tangible ideas for people to respond to.
Okay, cool. Anybody else? Steven?
I was going to move for adjournment.
I was going to second. We already did the minutes. They were at the top of the meeting. Okay, so our next meeting is the 17th.
Yes.
Okay. Same time.
Angie will be here, I can't be here on the
Yes.
17th.
Same time, same place. If you cannot attend, if you could just give me a heads up and email, just because I always like to make sure that we'll have a quorum, because I will cancel the meeting so that other people don't have to come here if we don't have a quorum, just to be polite. So just let me know if your plans change. And Stephen, back to you.
I move for adjournment.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Michaela seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Have a wonderful night. We have adjourned at 8:16.
Awesome.